Everyone knows Bruce Lee as the man who brought martial arts to the world stage, a teacher who inspired millions to seek self-mastery and express themselves honestly. He was a philosopher, a movie star, an icon of human potential. But what happened when you actually tried to be his student? What was it like behind the closed doors of his schools in Oakland and Los Angeles? The truth is, not everyone was prepared for it. While Lee inspired countless followers, his training was intensely demanding. Some of the most important lessons in martial arts history were never filmed because they took place in private, grueling sessions that pushed people to their absolute limit. This is the story of why Bruce Lee's training was so realistic and so demanding that it acted as a filter, because students weren't just signing up for a class. They were stepping into a laboratory for real-world combat. To understand why Lee's methods were a shock to some, you have to understand the world he was rebelling against. In the 1960s, many martial arts schools were built on tradition and forms. Lee famously dismissed some of these rigid systems as the classical mess. He argued that real combat was chaotic and unpredictable, and that practicing prearranged patterns alone was like trying to learn how to swim on dry land. It looked like fighting, but it couldn't prepare you for the reality of deep water. While hard sparring certainly existed in styles like karate and boxing, Lee felt many schools were caught in a trap of ineffective traditions. New students at his schools, expecting to learn set routines, were instead thrown into the water. Lee's classes weren't about slow, methodical learning. They were about pressure and adaptation. His philosophy was built on unscripted, resistant training that forced you to confront the unpredictable nature of a real fight. He believed a technique was useless unless it survived contact, and he was the ultimate test. Karate champion Joe Louis, a man respected for his power, was one of many who trained with Lee. Louis confirmed Lee's incredible speed, having been on the receiving end of it himself. He said Lee had blinding speed, especially with his hands, and that he always knew when you weren't ready. Lee wasn't interested in scoring theoretical points. He was interested in what was direct, efficient, and worked in a real confrontation. This was the first filter. Students arrived expecting to learn a martial art, but they were instead faced with the raw principles of combat. The shock of this realism was often a major hurdle. They weren't just learning moves. They were being forced to unlearn years of what Lee considered artificial techniques. Sparring with Bruce Lee wasn't just a drill. It was an education in speed and impact. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He was a scientist of combat, and his training sessions were his living laboratory. His goal was to strip away everything that was non-essential, and to do that, he had to apply real pressure. Ted Wong, who became one of Lee's most trusted private students, was chosen to be a regular sparring partner. Wong described sparring with Lee as facing someone with such masterful speed and distance that you simply couldn't touch him. According to Wong, being Lee's training partner wasn't always easy, and holding hand targets or bags could consistently cause bruises. This wasn't training for a tournament. It was training for reality. Dan Inosanto, another of Lee's top students and a seasoned martial artist, has given vivid accounts of Lee's abilities. Inosanto, an accomplished athlete in his college days, said sparring with Lee felt like being in slow motion. He said Lee's speed flabbergasted him. But it wasn't just speed, it was the shocking power Lee could generate. Inosanto has stated that Lee could shell-shock a person with his lead jab, a feat of power most people couldn't replicate. Accounts from this era paint a picture of a man obsessed with realism. Lee and his students used protective gear for intense sparring sessions that integrated techniques from boxing, fencing, and various martial arts. He would intercept an opponent's intention, striking before their attack was even fully launched. NBA legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was another of Lee's famous students. He recalled his first meeting where Lee's wife, Linda, demonstrated a kick on a heavy bag that Kareem was holding. The impact rocked me backward a few feet, convincing him on the spot of the effectiveness of Lee's methods. This was the gauntlet. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was a test of nerve, a psychological crucible. Could you perform when faced with overwhelming speed and aggression? For some, the answer was no. It wasn't that their bodies couldn't take the punishment, but that their minds couldn't handle the pressure. Before we get to the final act and the philosophy behind the intensity, if you're fascinated by the raw, unfiltered stories of martial arts legends, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. We explore the real history behind the myths every week. So, why did he do it? Why create a training environment that was so demanding? The answer lies at the heart of his philosophy. Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. Lee believed the path to mastery wasn't through addition, but subtraction. His famous quote, "It is not daily increase, but daily decrease. Hack away at the unessential," was the core of his method. The intense sparring sessions were the chisel he used to chip away everything that didn't work. The students who couldn't keep up weren't necessarily weak. They were often practitioners of a different paradigm. They had learned to perform martial arts, but Bruce Lee was demanding they become martial artists, people capable of functioning in the chaos of real violence. He wasn't teaching a style, he was teaching a way of being. One of his core tenets was using no way as way, having no limitation as limitation. The students who left were often those who couldn't let go of their previous training and their attachment to a specific style. Lee demanded they empty their cup, but many were clinging to it for dear life. There's a famous legend of a session where a large group of students showed up in the morning, and by the afternoon, only a handful remained. While the exact numbers are likely an embellishment, the story captures an essential truth. Lee's training was a filter, designed to separate those who wanted to learn, to fight, from those who just wanted to learn a martial art. Lee understood that, to prepare for a real fight, you had to train for that reality. He once told Dan Inosanto that to transcend technique, the body must take over without conscious thought. This idea of effortless action, where it hits all by itself, was the ultimate goal. The pressure of sparring was designed to forge that instinct. In the end, the students who walked away from Bruce Lee's schools weren't failures. They were proof of his concept. They came seeking the wisdom of a philosopher, but were met with the unforgiving fire of a combat pragmatist. They had signed up for a class, but Lee was running a laboratory where theories were tested with full force impact. His sparring was intense because reality can be intense. A fight for your life doesn't follow a script. The fact that his training was so demanding is a testament to the authenticity of his methods. He wasn't just teaching people how to fight. He was forcing them to confront the raw, terrifying truth of what it means to be effective. The ones who quit simply weren't looking for that truth. But the ones who stayed, the ones who endured the bruises and the psychological onslaught, were forged into something new. They became the living embodiment of Jeet Kune Do, a legacy proven not by how many students he attracted, but by how few were ready for his revolution.